Genie is a cloud-based software company and helps automate overtime HVAC requests. Our software physically plugs into the network of submeters and helps automate the reading of those submeters. And we also have access control. Our cloud-based solution physically plugs into your controllers and your readers and automates the adding and removing users, as well as now it enables you to use your phone as your credentialing device. Everything that we touch helps bring a better tenant experience without breaking the bank.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Realcomm Live. Each week over the last couple months, I've tried to choose one word to describe the episode. In other words, fun, interesting, crazy. Today's word is complex. And the reason I use the word complex is the in-building wireless industry has been around for at least 20 years. I remember there was actually a company called In-Building Wireless. And this is probably going back 15, 18 years. And their sole purpose was to go into buildings and make sure cell phone coverage worked and maybe, work on Wi-Fi a little bit. And ironically, they left our industry and went into the medical profession because our industry was having trouble, was struggling with who should pay for the infrastructure inside of a building. For years and years and years, building owners point their finger at carriers and carriers point their fingers at building owners and saying, it's your responsibility. Hence, I have been in beautiful, stunning Class A buildings, biggest cities in the world, leaning against the window, trying to get a cell coverage in order to make a phone call. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon how you look at it, the conversation is not getting any simpler. So Ian, if you could bring up our illustration. This is something I'm working with a group on. We're probably 8 weeks into calls once a week. And we started with the idea of, okay, let's try to understand what the consumer electronics players are putting in their phones so we can kind of get a look into the future and understand what it is we're going to be wanting to do with our cell phones inside of a building. Okay, so on the left side, these are kind of some of the big buckets, the G's, the 3, 4, 5s. What do we use that for? Mobile device, voice, and data. Well, of course, we need Wi-Fi. And then we've got new stuff coming, not new, but becoming more popular. Proximity, NFC, UWB, and BLE. And then all of a sudden, satellite stuff used for GPS. And Apple just announced a new application using satellite. And then finally, smart building automation, which is connecting all those devices, smart building devices, potentially up to a 5G or some type of a G network. And then on the right side of the iPhone 14 is all the different radios that we now find inside of a phone. And that'll tell you where they're going. And then as building owners and operators need to prepare the buildings to be able to receive information and communicate with these radios. So with that, let's bring on our two guests. We got two great guys who are actually part of that Friday call. Jon Morris, CEO of Ballast Networks, and Chris Wixom, VP of Wireless Commercial Sales in Corning. Guys, really good to see you. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, and I think you'll attest. We thought those calls were going to start out simple, and I think we're probably into the 6th, 7th week, and the document keeps getting bigger. And so far, we're still in the, oh my gosh, we're creating more questions than we have answers. But I think we're getting close to turning a corner. But I want to thank you for your participation in that as well, because it takes a lot of good brains to try to solve this one. So let's do this. Why don't you take 30 seconds and just do a quick intro yourself, give the people some perspective on your backgrounds and how you got to this place of dealing with in-building telecommunications.
So Chris Wixom, Vice President of Wireless Sales for Corning, have been in this industry for quite some time. Started out working for AT&T and Sprint, and then got into this business about 18 years ago. So I've been doing in-building wireless for quite some time.
Awesome.
So I'm Jon Morris. I'm the CEO of Ballast Networks. I've been doing every aspect of wireless infrastructure for more than 25 years, and been doing the in-building wireless business since 2011. and formed Ballast Networks to provide connectivity in the in-building environment using both DAS and private networks.
Awesome. So both of you pretty credentialed in this space, which, by the way, changes every day. Enter Elon Musk and Starlink, right? just one other thing that we have to think about. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of different radios, and for the most part, this conversation will touch about, we'll touch on the smart building component, all the systems and devices in the building. But for the most part, this conversation today is going to focus on when a tenant or a visitor walks into a building with an iPhone 14 or other Android device, with all the radios inside that little device coming into a building. What are they going to be expecting to do, and what is the building owner going to need to do to prepare to make sure that happens? And as I mentioned, we've got the cellular communications, we've got DAS, we've got Wi-Fi. Let's start with you, Chris. How big and complex is this in-building wireless challenge?
So it's interesting. I'm not sure I would even call it a challenge. I call it an opportunity, right? Okay. There's so much happening right now with Wi-Fi 6, 5G coming out, significant changes in additional spectrum that's available, private networking, the applications that go along with that. That is a huge opportunity to make a very big difference for the organization that you work in. So I would just say, don't be scared of the challenge. It's an opportunity, and then just leverage experts to help you through it.
John, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the in-building environment, I think, I always tell people that in Manhattan, there's 60,000 commercial buildings, and there's like 300 DAS locations. And you've got, the amount of bandwidth required growing at 40% a year. And, as that happens, you take more bandwidth away from the macro network, and you create a lot of challenges in that in-building environment. At the same point, a lot of the platforms and equipment that Chris's company puts together, Corning and others, there's an opportunity to not just solve for the in-building connectivity for voice, but also deal with IoT and edge compute, right, location-based services, and other technologies that can really, help the tenants and clients and visitors of a particular building.
Well, I just want to go back to the point you made. 60,000 buildings in Manhattan and only 300 DAS systems.
It's something like that. It's a real small number on a percentage basis.
So does that mean people living, working, shopping in those buildings that are not outfitted are not going to be able to take full advantage of all the applications and systems and solutions that people are walking around with their cell phones?
No, I mean, I'll let Chris answer this too. I don't want to monopolize this conversation, but I would say that, there's only so much signal that can come from the macro environment outside into these environments. And there's only so much you can do with Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi has its limitations. Certainly Wi-Fi is a big part of the solution. But, in terms of what you can have happen from a technology perspective, to not have quality wireless services in your building, I think is a real problem for vacancy, for tenancy, et cetera.
Right. All right. Let's go, Chris. In preparing for this, I said, guys, give me your top 3 challenges or issues or points, opportunities that you think should bubble up to the top of this very complex conversation. Chris, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I would say that the 3 that I would probably cover is one is, let's start at the base level with your wireless infrastructure. You want to look at this, I would say, from across the board in a comprehensive way. And so what does this mean? It means that you're trying not to do parallel networks. As John was saying, you've got Wi-Fi, you've got cellular, you've got security, potentially building automation. John even mentioned location-based services. There are applications and infrastructure that just do that. So I would say the first thing first is look at what you're trying to do and look at it from a comprehensive perspective, because if you can do that, you can cut 30% off of the cost of deploying, disparate parallel systems. So, and we at Corning would say the best way to do that is to do a fiber deep architecture. You can do that because fiber is so small. I can have 6 to 12 to even 24 paths in one small cable. And when I do that, I can put Wi-Fi and cellular, IT security, private networking, and other types of infrastructure over that same cable. So it's a converged build. It's not really convergence. So you still have your separate paths with your fiber in there. So you maintain your security and they're still separate networks, but it's one infrastructure pool that you're doing, and it provides extra paths for the future as well. So that's probably the first thing that I would say. And the other benefits of that, particularly in this world, is we're trying to drive sustainability. And if you can reduce your fiber, or if you can reduce your copper needs by 70%, if I can reduce the cooling and the power and other types of things that you need, then that can be very significant for developers. In particular, this approach, if you do it right, can even eliminate the need for telecom closets, as an example. So it's pretty significant. So that's number one. Number two is frequency. And this is where I was talking about how exciting it is right now that we've got so much change going on. 5G, 4G to 5G, and that movement is a great thing. But the other thing that people don't realize is there's a lot of new spectrum available. So that green area over the left on the chart is kind of what we've had traditionally. That's what we've been doing in building wireless for years. And the blue area in the middle is really where 5G is focused right now. And it's a variety of things called C-band, which the carriers just spent $90 billion on to introduce this to the market.
What does the C stand for?
I'm sorry?
What does the C stand for in C-band?
John, I don't know. What
Somebody said continuous earlier. That's not the...
I have no idea.
That's a very good question. I've never actually asked it.
All right, didn't mean to interrupt, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. But it really is an important change to our capability to do wireless in building, because it's literally like going from dirt roads to a super highway, because you're moving from like 10 megahertz chunks that we used to have in the past to 100 megahertz chunks that you can do. So you can do quite a bit more with automation, with streaming, with your connectivity needs over this spectrum. And then the middle one in between is something called CBRS, and that's really private networking. So it really changes the dynamics of what you can do with this spectrum, because you can own and control the spectrum in a much greater way. And then finally, what we're really not going to talk a lot about today, but that purple area over on the far right is actually millimeter wave. And we at Corning do a lot of millimeter wave. That's really for high capacity venues, stadiums, airports, and the like.
So what inning are we in as it relates to C-band?
Oh, we're just in the initial throes of it. So
really? Okay.
C-band was initially deployed. I think the first C-band deployment was for the Super Bowl this year down at SoFi Stadium. And now the carriers are in the throes of deploying it pretty aggressively across the board. I think you're going to see 2023, 2024 being major years for C-band, which brings me to point 3, which is budget and funding. In general, carrier funding has decreased pretty significantly. So many building owners are resulting to fund in-building systems themselves. I would just say don't look at it in terms of a black and white type of situation where you're going to fund it or the carrier is going to fund it. In many situations that we've had recently, it's actually been a mix. And there's actually quite a bit of funding out there for C-band right now. So you might fund the traditional bands and then have the carriers come in and fund some of it for 5G C-band.
Is it getting easier for owner operators to deploy wireless, or more complex and difficult?
Well, the technology is getting much better and easier. The space that you need for head ends, the remotes and the capabilities of the remotes have evolved quite a bit over the years. But certainly, if you go back to that frequency chart, it's pretty complex. You've got quite a bit of different frequencies and capabilities that you need to consider to deploy this. So it's when I first got into this business, my big change was going from a tri-band to a quad-band system. Now you're looking at many bands and many frequencies that you have to consider.
Interesting. All right, John, before we get to you, let's take our brief commercial break, and then we're going to come back and get your 3 points.
Awesome.
The wireless industry is changing fast, and Halo is leading the way as the new intelligent, cutting-edge leader in neutral host infrastructure. Serving all vertical markets, Class A office, hospitality, residential, healthcare, stadiums, and large public venues. Delivering state-of-the-art technology solutions with future upgrades to accommodate the highest demands of mobile users and new 5G applications. A trusted and proven partner to all wireless carriers, REITs, owners, and developers. The Halo team is leading the industry with the highest standards in mobile and wireless communication. A trusted and proven partner to all wireless carriers. The future of wireless is now, and Halo's full-service turnkey solutions are solving our clients' communication challenges today and in the future. Halo, connecting the wireless world.
All right, John, so of the hundreds of issues, topics regarding in-building wireless that we can talk about, what are the 3 that bubble up for you?
So I think, I want to kind of parallel or add on to what Chris initially talked about. One is the need for a holistic approach to in-building connectivity. So we think there's a lot of value in working across the different teams in this environment, having an approach across the portfolio, but really understanding when you're doing a retrofit of a building for other purposes, you're opening walls, or you're doing a greenfield build that's different than something that's an existing location where you've got poor services, where you may not have the capabilities to open the walls and do those kinds of things, may dictate different kinds of solutions and the cost of those solutions. And so I would talk about greenfield versus brownfield. I think is interesting. I also think cost is pretty interesting. If you can use a platform like Corning's or with fiber to the edge, and you can use it for multiple things, multiple technologies, I think it's different than if you're just trying to solve for a particular issue. There also may be technologies that come into play depending on what a carrier may or may not be willing to pay for in a particular location. And so who pays is pretty relevant. So the economics of these builds approach portfolio-wise is important. And, looking at a strategy that can be repeated across that portfolio, I think is very compelling. And again, we're very comfortable with a lot of the different OEMs that are out there, but having a very disciplined approach, I think, will make this business a lot less complex as you move through time and space.
So from a business standpoint, if you took 100 building owners of various sizes, shapes, capabilities, IT staff size, just a nice mix of, go in any downtown and choose 100 buildings randomly. What percentage of those 100 buildings will have anything that even looks close to a comprehensive wireless strategy? And you guys talk to a lot of people. What's the number?
I would say it's like 5%, 2%. I think outside of the large REITs that have a lot of staff that got very seasoned CTOs that have the budgets to be able to holistically approach the portfolio and can do so on a recurring basis, I don't think there's very many, honestly.
And I don't, Chris, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would think that that is very, very true. And one of the questions that we get asked is where do you go? How do you study? How do you get smarter at this so that you can understand it? And sometimes, honestly, I say you can't. It's a very complex situation that changes quite a bit. And so my biggest advice that I give clients that I talk to is work with a consultant that has expertise in this space, a trusted one, like Jon, as an example, to help you understand and move through this space. Unless you do have a dedicated team that's on it, it's very difficult to stay on top of this because it's changing every day.
And I think that's a significant point. I mean, in any given head of IT, head of telecommunications, whatever title they're given, you do this maybe 2-3 times in a career, or if you move from one company to another, maybe 1 or 2 more times. But overall, you have to relearn every time you do it because things are changing. And if you don't have somebody on staff, that's a Herculean effort. Somebody like Jon and other consulting companies, this is all they do every day, right? And so they have to stay up to speed. And I've been a proponent of consultants my entire career, saying, at some point you can't be an expert in everything, and getting somebody who is an expert makes an awful lot of sense. So the percentage is low. I asked this question to a number of people and nobody can really give me a definite answer, but let's throw it out there. How much activity from a cell phone, especially given all these new features and capabilities, how much activity is done inside versus outside? Do you guys have any idea?
Oh yeah, it's 80% of calls and activity are made indoors, and that's increased over the years.
You said 80%.
Yeah, 80%. And the other thing that I would say is, I didn't mention before when we were looking at the spectrum chart, one of the things that makes it more difficult as we move to higher frequencies, which is in that spectrum chart that we were looking at, it's very difficult for those that spectrum to penetrate in building. Right. And so the need for a 5G strategy and a 5G in building system becomes all the more important and greater because those signals can't penetrate.
I would just add on to what Chris said and make the comment that with LEED certified buildings, people trying to be very energy efficient, you end up with metal in the glass, and metal does not allow for signal penetration from the outside in very effectively. And I would just add to, we're having a conversation about tethering and people's use of their phone for everything. As that, when you have a situation where you've got a fixed amount of money people pay for their phones, but they have unlimited data, they have no incentive to move from their phone to Wi-Fi.
Right.
And so, one of the challenges buildings owners have is, I still want to service that guest that's coming in that's not moving to the Wi-Fi, and how do I do that? And so the demand for these in building services, whether it's growth of entertainment, whether it's use of other technologies, this the energy efficiency, the demand is not expected to
well in a 5-year horizon. I've actually been involved in some pretty interesting debates on will 5G or will the Gs ultimately replace 802.11, right? And as it becomes more prevalent, more pervasive, more powerful, will we see a convergence of activity into one, making it easier? Now I don't need 1, 2, or 3 different networks in my building. I truly only have one. You don't need to comment on that. I just want to make that point.
I think it's been an ongoing debate for years, and depending on what side you're on, others say that one's going to replace the other. I would say that the needs for capacity are ever increasing, and that you're always going to see the different systems complement each other, not replace.
Well, and I sent both you guys an article about Elon Musk and how they're expanding the capabilities of Starlink. From a GPS perspective, I would keep my eye on Elon Musk as well. I know that may sound crazy, but that man has thrown suitcase-sized satellites up in the air and is doing more for less, as all of his companies do. So I think we have some other technologies at the edge also going to be nudging in on this conversation. Not
Sure.
today necessarily, but certainly down the road.
You
Final
know,
question. Go ahead.
real quickly, there's one of your audience members made a comment around carriers versus landlords having to pay for these solutions.
Ongoing debate.
And it's an ongoing debate, and I mentioned it earlier. I will tell you that it's not possible for the carriers to pay for all of the systems. They couldn't build out 50,000 buildings in Manhattan and still pay their dividend. But, is there some middle ground around, these business models between the carriers, the building owners, and, the carriers that, work?
If you take your number of 360,000, and there was an article this week about one of the carriers saying we're done, we're topped out, no more investing. How do we fill that gap? And that's been an ongoing question for 15, 20 years. It's great to have the infrastructure outside, but if you're trying to get inside and the building owners don't feel they need to pay for it and the carriers have no more money left, I think we may continue to see ourselves in an impasse. So we got to work on this. It's not a technical issue at this point, it's a business issue.
Yeah, and I would just add, for those that don't know it, you don't necessarily need a capital budget if you're the enterprise or a developer doing that. There are third parties out there that will finance and build and manage this for you and turn it into an expense-based model. That's been doing quite a bit out there as well.
Yep.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and I would just say that there's, the structured cabling, meaning that whether it's the fiber or Cat 60, and making sure you take care of that fiber, take care of that structured cabling in the building. Because if you have that where you need it, then you're only paying for the equipment on the ends. Right. And that's a really big deal.
Well, and for years I've been using the analogy of water. Telecommunications is as important as water, right? And the utilities are responsible to bring the water to the edge of the building, and you're responsible to put in the pipes, right? And in this world, as we become more and more reliant on telecommunications, I do think there's a certain responsibility, and it's maybe shifting, that owner, landlords, operators, take responsibility for that telecommunication infrastructure. And there are creative ways to help pay for it, but somebody's got to step up and do it at some point. All right, so we only got a minute or two left, so if you can maybe take a minute. Chris, we'll start with you. You're meeting with a bunch of people. They're asking you all these questions about wireless. You can tell that they're confused. It's Friday afternoon. You're ready to go for a beer. They're asking you for some advice for a Monday morning meeting they're having with their CEO. Just give them 30, 45 seconds advice on next steps or what they should do regarding in-building wireless.
That's always a difficult question because it depends on who I'm talking to. But I think for a broad audience, I would say there's so much change going on. It's probably worth looking at your current plan, reviewing it, and thinking about things that we've talked about today. And have you considered that as part of the plan? And then secondly, given the benefits of being able to pull all of this together, who do you need to pull? How do I pull the different people at different parts of the organization, pull them together to look at the plan and make sure you're looking at it in multiple ways as opposed to just a siloed approach? So I try and break that siloed approach.
Very, very good point. Jon?
I would just make, if it were just a conversation around, for a Monday morning meeting, I think right now when you've got low utilization rates in a lot of these buildings, it's the optimal time to invest in this kind of infrastructure when you don't have a bunch of people that you've got to work around to actually put that infrastructure in place. And so I would encourage people to take the initiative and get working on it while these buildings are, people come back and people figure out the new normal.
Right. And my 30-second add-on would be, in a day and an age when, certainly younger people, are tethered to their phones, rely on them heavily. We've already seen it that, walking into a building with your cell phone, whether it's a B, or C class building, if you don't have coverage inside that building, that's going to impact occupancy. That's going to impact people signing leases. That's going to impact tenant satisfaction. So I don't think this is something you can avoid, regardless of what size, age, size your building is. And I think, finding somebody like Jon as a consultant or others out there to sit down and have a conversation and understand the options, understand the expenses, but don't wait for people to just stop signing leases in your building to figure out that maybe it had something to do with your inability to make a phone call or send a text inside your building. So,
Yeah.
all right, guys, I'm sure this conversation is going to continue. I'll call this chapter 1 of a 10-chapter book. And thank you so much for your time and effort and willingness to educate the market and the community. I really appreciate that. And hopefully we can have you back on. And we had a lot of great questions we didn't have time for, but we'll dissect those questions, and who knows, maybe we'll do a Realcomm episode just based on just one of those questions, because they're important and we want to get answers to these folks. So thank you both and have a great day and great weekend.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
All right. So with that, let's bring on my favorite part of Realcomm Live, the news, where Howard Berger and team come up and help you sort through all those millions of articles. We know it's automated. It's a little art, little science, but Howard and the team do a great job. So take it away and tell us what the heck's going on this week in real estate technology.
Thanks, Jim. And great show. Really an honor having Jon and Chris. This in-building wireless really needs to be unpacked for so many owners and occupiers who really can't understand the complexity, or it's very difficult. Thank you guys for shedding some light on this huge topic. So for the news, just a couple of highlights from this week's weekly news briefing. It goes out every Thursday morning. So our lead article this week is by Jim. It's entitled China Tech Competition and the Impacts of the Built Environment. So Jim started this discussion way back in 2002, 20 years ago. And over the past 25, 30 years, the Chinese Communist Party has really architected an explosive ascension of China's tech sector. It's literally dwarfed the efforts of the rest of the world. AI, biotech, big data, 5G, nanotech, solar, quantum computing, power technologies, robotics, IoT, and not to mention, they've been systematically cornering the market on the material building blocks for these technologies like lithium and cobalt and rare earth metals to help us better understand these growing risks and opportunities. Realcomm's now working with Google's Dr. Eric Schmidt, and he has a newly formed organization called the Special Competitive Studies Project, SCSP, which was modeled after Nelson Rockefeller's Special Studies Project, which was created after World War II. Now, Warren Wilson is the Director of Economy at SCSP, and he's going to be introducing this topic to our CoreTech audience in Silicon Valley on November 15th. So just mark down, please learn more about this in this week's article. And if you can, join us at CoreTech in November for a much deeper dive. Now, I also want to shout out to this week's tech partner, RE Transform, for their submission called Measuring Your Portfolio's Financial Performance is the Key to Making Future Investments. And in this article, Manisha Rivas and Ann Spolber from RE Transform, they talk about effective real estate financial modeling and how it's a critical tool to corporate decision-making on financial assets, like sensitivity, scenario analysis, stress testing. It all helps manage risk and understanding the impact of changes on your property and portfolio KPIs. So bottom line, the right financial modeling tool can help manage multiple property valuations, investments, budgets, portfolio, all in one app. Check out this great article by Manisha and Ann at RE Transform. So every week, we also spotlight a smart building project from our Smart Building Best Practice Showcase. And this week, it's Boston Properties Embarcadero Center and how they tackled after-hour HVAC on demand. So Embarcadero Center is one of the largest mixed-use complexes in the Western U.S. It spans 5 blocks in San Francisco's financial district. And like a lot of other dense projects, they were really concerned with how do you optimize HVAC costs, not only during regular operations, but especially during events like the pandemic, when you had high operational costs, but the utilization of the buildings was like near zero. So they focused on working closely with the tenants to come up with a strategy to limit on-demand HVAC requests only when necessary. And this week's Best Practice Showcase project focuses on this transformative project. So read about it in the advisory. Next, MRI Software unveils its next generation real estate platform. Good news from the Ascend Users Conference. Earlier this week, MRI Software, global leader in real estate solutions, presented its vision for the next generation of its open and connected technology platform, MRI Agora, at the Ascend Users Conference in New Orleans. And this MRI Agora platform is going to enable real estate businesses to make better decisions through better connected data with better process automation and the ability to connect various data platforms and applications in a common data model and modern user interface. So way to go, MRI. And finally, New York City's a New York City building, it switched on an interactive LED glass installation. And in this ANC's installation in the Tin Building in Lower Manhattan Seaport is the largest deployment today of a fully transparent LED embedded construction grade GLAM media glass in the US. So this is fully programmable glass. You can program the content on it. The GLAM media glass covers more than 1,100 square feet of space surrounding the escalators and turns it essentially into a giant programmable LED screen. And as you know, we at Realcomm and IBCOM love to see adoption of these immersive technologies. So great job in ANC, and if you're in the area, stop by and see it. So lots going on. So check out these and more in this week's briefing.
Yep. Again, millions of articles, lots of opinions, but you really do a great job at honing in on the relevant stuff that's really making a difference. And just a brief mention on that article, that China Tech article. You are correct. Our conversation started in probably 2003, and then we traveled to Asia and we saw it all firsthand. We came back. We tried to communicate what we saw. It was difficult. Fast forward to 2019, where we met in Nashville with a small group and kind of started the conversation up again. Then the pandemic hit, but there is a lot going on in this space. And I would really encourage everybody just to read the article, not for the article, but for the link to SCSP, their website, and this 180-page article on future competitiveness of the U.S. as it relates to technology. And the built environment is smack dab in the middle of all these conversations, whether it's 5G, whether it's smart buildings, smart cities. We have an important role in all of this. And the sooner everybody understands the size and scope of the challenge and the opportunities, the better. So thank you for highlighting that and for doing a great job on the news.
Thanks, Jim.
Have a great weekend.
You all.
All right. So before I give you next week's show, let's take and hear from our final sponsor, and I'll be right back. All right. As Howard mentioned, this wireless conversation, next stop for the wireless conversation is CoreTech. CoreTech is our corporate real estate event we've been holding for 12 years. We actually put it on pause for a couple during the pandemic, so we're just getting back. Smaller event by design. It's really meant to be a single room conversation, overwhelmingly end users, corporate real estate, professionals, facilities, workplace. And the goal there is in a more quiet, closed room environment to attack some of the biggest issues that we've got facing the corporate real estate world, the tenant side, the occupier side, everything from in-building wireless and wireless infrastructure to, what does a hybrid workplace look like? What are some of the new technologies to create immersive experiences inside these new 21st century offices? Going to be a great, great, great event. And next week, we're going to have Kapil Lahoti on, the Chief Digital and Technology Officer for the Global Workplace Solutions Group at CBRE. I mean, massive service provider, largest in the world. And and Kapil focuses on the corporate side of the conversation. He'll also be speaking at CoreTech. We got a great 2 segments with him. He's going to tell us everything that's going on inside the corporate real estate world as it relates to what they need back at their corporate headquarters, as well as what they need in their regional offices, retail outlets, and more. It's going to be a great episode, and we really want to thank Kapil for being on with us. And with that, I'd like to bid you farewell for today. You have a great day, great weekend, and we will see you next week on Realcomm Live. Be well.